Greetings from the early afternoon, everyone. Or that's when I'm recording this voice part of the video anyway. If I sound a bit sick throughout the video, it's because I am a little bit stuffy. That, you know, how it is. But, before we get into the video, few things. First of all, if you enjoy watching, please consider liking and subscribing, because you see more content like this, and personally, I like seeing the funny numbers go up, so it's like a win-win, you know? But, some warnings, too. There's gonna be spoilers to The Binding of Isaac, gameplay-wise, story-wise, I guess, stuff like that. But more seriously, two things. In the, background footage, there are probably gonna be some flashing lights, so if you're sensitive, just beware, you know. It shouldn't be any more than mild, but some points, it's just how The Binding of Isaac is, right? And also, some of the ideas we talk about in this video are going to be themed around delirium and losing your memories. So if that bothers you, you know, I'm not gonna judge you for wanting to click off. That's totally okay. Just do whatever makes you feel the most comfortable. Alright? Oh, and also, everything we talk about here is as it is in the Repentance Plus DLC. Anyway, let's get into it. So, I have some issues with the Void. The stage, not the item. If you saw my last video, you'll probably know I actually like the item, but that's not important here, so, yeah, I have some issues with the Void as a stage. And it seems like most people do, too, actually. I mean, to be honest, I didn't really realize the issues until I heard some other people talk about it, but then it, makes sense. And I realized I have some of my own thoughts on that too. So today I want to talk about that. But not just my issues with the Void as a stage and Delirium as a final boss. I also want to talk about some of my ideas on how I would fix it if I were to. But first, we're going to talk about some of the main problems of the floor and the boss. So let's go on into that. Starting off with the floor itself, we can already see some issues. Generally, when you make a finale for a floor, you want two main things. Given, it can depend on the game, of course, but the first one is challenge. And this especially applies for a game like The Binding of Isaac, where even if the story is really good and it's really gripping, it's not going to carry the experience of the finale because you're gonna play it a lot if you play Isaac a lot, right? So if you've beaten it even a dozen times, the challenge is gonna be a lot of what makes the experience interesting near the end. But unfortunately, it's just not the case for the Void. There are some aspects which make it a little bit tougher, I guess, but let's be real here. The Void as a floor is probably the easiest part of your run. By the time you get there, you're almost definitely pretty powerful, and you can just bulldoze through all those reused, reduced, and recycled rooms of floors you've already made it past. And also, you probably want it to be unique, like the finale, because you're adding a new idea or a new factor into things, and that just makes things even more interesting and even more fun, because you're going through something new. On your first playthrough, you're going to have to deal with something that's different and that you don't understand, and later on, you have to deal with stuff that is different than the rest of the game. The Void kind of delivers on that, but not really. And let's talk about how, both of these aren't fully delivered on. There's three main things which the Void has that are unique. First of all, there's multiple boss rooms. Second of all, there's more champions, and last of all, void portal enemies. The multiple boss room thing is pretty interesting, and it's probably my favorite thing in the execution of the void. Having multiple boss rooms generally isn't too difficult. You can, again, bulldoze through them, but, trying to figure out where the Delirium boss room is, and either not doing it first because you want more items, or doing it first because you don't want to waste your time, is something, I guess. It doesn't make it more difficult, but I guess it's like a little game, and that's kind of cool. But other than that, not a ton. Again, you're gonna bulldoze through it, unless maybe if it's like the Lamb or Isaac or Blue Baby, it might take you a few minutes, but it's still probably not gonna be that bad. Then you have the Void Portals, which is probably my favorite in idea, but in execution is kind of meh. Actually, similar thing with the champion. You bulldoze through it. Even if they make it kind of unique, you just run through it. It's easy. The portals and the champions are just another target. The champion is honestly kind of a boring way to do things, so it's not going to be part of what I talk about in a few minutes with fixing it. I mean, okay, if you run into a rainbow enemy, it might be like kind of interesting for a few seconds, but then it's dead. They're just something else to kill, and it's just meh. But I do kind of like the multiple boss rooms, and I also kind of like the portals. So how about we pin those ideas for later, and let's talk about another part of the floor, the theming. I like the idea. It's in line with the lore of, like, what's happening with Isaac in the chest. And so I think that making, like, the loss and scrambling of your memories a thing for a floor is interesting. And I think it worked really well for the darker tones of Isaac, too. But it's just not followed through with very well. Despite having multiple mechanics and its own theme, the Void doesn't really feel like it has its own identity, because while you're running through all these different rooms, there's not a lot happening. It doesn't make you think about the floor or what things mean that much, and it's just kind of a mishmash of stuff. It is unique, kind of, in theming, but there's not a lot to it, and you're just running through it and defeating everything, and meh. And I think there's a lot more potential, so yeah. Well, let's talk about Delirium now. Delirium is messy. There's telefragging, which I've heard, and based on what I've observed, seems like it's true, that telefragging has been fixed. It's not really a thing anymore, but even outside of that, even if that's not a thing, there are still issues with the boss fight. The main one being, gameplay-wise, it gets way too erratic by the end. The beginning is okay, but by the end of it, Delirium is just teleporting everywhere. It's super fast, so it's just also like, if you're in a fight with a stationary boss, like if Delirium is a non-stationary boss, he's just zipping around the room crazily while teleporting everywhere, and both of those in combination makes it way too chaotic and completely unintelligible. And then even outside of that, if it were intelligible, it's not even that difficult. I mean, it is hard in the way it is, but if it were not for the fact that Delirium is basically impossible to read properly, it wouldn't be that difficult. And that's the main issue, right? Alongside with that, I do think there's some theming issues with a bit less of direction and how the fight is not smooth, right? But we can talk about that as we're talking about how I'd fix it. But the main point is, it's just too chaotic. It's not really fun, and the fight basically just turns into a shoot over there and hope you hit Delirium sort of thing. Because if you don't have like an instant hit thing like technology, whether or not Delirium is in the place you fire at, where it was before, is a gamble, and it's just annoying. I don't like it. So, I'm getting heated. But the thing is I'm not just here to say that I don't like it, or that I don't like the floor, and that I think it wasn't executed on. I heard something a while ago where, I don't remember the exact words, but paraphrasing, it was like, if your criticism doesn't have, like, a purpose, if you're just saying you don't like things, you're not putting anything into the world, you're just complaining, right? So, I have ideas on how I think the Void could be really good as a floor, rather than just meh. Because I think it has a lot of potential. And I want to talk about how that potential could have been delivered on, or could be delivered on really well. So, let's get into that. Okay, so first of all, I want to change the format of the Void, like, as a whole. So let's just talk about the structure that I'm thinking, and then we'll get into more of the specifics. Let's say you just beat Hush, and you're going on into the Void Portal, and wow, you're in the basement or the cellar or whatever. Basically, you're in an area that is themed off of chapter 1, you know, the basement, the cellar. And that is like a group of, like, that area is a group of, let's say, 4 to 5 rooms, you know, and you walk through those, and then you run into a boss room. At that boss room, after you defeat it, a crack in the floor appears, you know, it forms, and then it goes up to a wall, and that wall bursts open, which shows you that things aren't stable. And this has to do with theming as well. So we're going to talk a bit about theming, a bit about structure, you know, the basics of the floor. Walking through that wall, you run into, what is this? A different chapter. You walk into, let's say, caves, right? And you repeat that. But things are a little bit off. Some of the walls have these red cracks in them, and whenever you're in a room with holes in the floor, you see these little red wispy lights floating out. Things are not as they seem. So you walk through, you defeat another boss room, and again, a crack forms and the wall bursts open. You walk through, and all of a sudden you're in the womb, or the depths. And things keep getting less stable. You see more cracks all around you, and the red lights aren't just red lights. There's now a red glow coming from the floor. The further you go, things get broken down. That's my theming for the floor. And a basic idea of the structure is, you know, you go through this little group, defeat a boss, and then you go through another little group, defeat a boss. You do that a handful of times, let's say 4 times, right? And as you go along, you're gonna see later chapters. Which floor and which chapter it is depends, but they get further and further as you go, which also, like, goes hand in hand with a difficulty thing, which we'll talk about in a couple minutes, right? And then after that, you get into, like, some other stuff, which again, we'll talk about in a few minutes. I'm getting too excited. Oh, okay. So that gives the direction, theming-wise, of the floor a lot more because, you know, everything's mixed up and things aren't okay. Things are breaking down, but it's not because every room is just randomly chosen. It's because you're going through the memories of Isaac, which gameplay-wise means that you're going through these rooms that are mostly pretty linear. So let's talk about the specifics of rooms, because we can't just ignore that. There's not challenge in what I'm describing here, because you're just clearing rooms and you're going through boss rooms. So let's talk about normal rooms. Boss rooms we will get to in a minute, but let's talk about these first. In normal rooms, there are two distinct events which can happen. The first is where one random enemy in the room is replaced with an anchor enemy, which like resembles a Gaper or Isaac. You know, it's like a humanoid, but with the white droopy and yellow eyes, Delirium stuff, you know? Anchor enemies have increased health, some boss armor, they follow you around slowly and occasionally shoot little rings of Delirium shots. Not that crazy. But while an anchor enemy is alive, all other enemies in the room get a unique effect. That is, 3 seconds after you kill one of those other enemies, its death animation reverses and it comes back with full health. So, you know, there's more challenge because you have to deal with the enemies of the floor, and it's unique because that doesn't really happen. I think that's fairly clear. And then the other event is with the void portals, which actually are pretty similar. You know, they replace, let's say, 2 to 3 enemies in the room, and they work normally, other than the fact that they have some boss armor, more health, and the enemies they spawn also have more health and start with a few seconds of boss armor, which similarly is unique because it is, you know, just how they work is different, and it's challenging because you actually have to deal with the floor, like the theming of the floor's challenges. But something that I like particularly think is like I like with this idea is you know, I mentioned it goes hand in hand with challenge, right? Is progressively getting to harder and harder themes of floors. It's that these enemies revolve around how the room works itself. When, say, an anchor enemy is there, whenever you kill another enemy in the room that's based on, you know, the theme of the floor, it comes back, which means that whenever you go further, it will get harder because those enemies are harder, and you actually have to fight them now. But actually, along with that, as you go further, the events themselves also get tougher outside of that, you know, interaction. With anchor enemies, you know, multiple might spawn. They don't revive each other, but, you know, multiple might spawn. And then you have to deal with other enemies even more while attacking them, right? And with void portals, more of them might spawn. Also, the events can actually cross over. Similarly, void portals don't revive, but with both combined, things can get pretty tough. And they become more common. So every room you come across, maybe not all of them actually, but a lot of the rooms you come across present something to you, something you have to deal with and figure out how to, you know, not take damage to, which makes it more difficult. It makes it unique. It makes you think. That's fun, and it's not a waste of your time like so many rooms are in how the void is right now. But normal rooms aren't the only ones, of course. There's also boss rooms. So let's say for chapter 1, you walk into the boss room, you see Dingle, but it's Delirious Dingle, because there's already a bunch of sprites for it. Why not have some dedicated boss fights? You see Dingle, no funny business, no turning into other bosses, no teleporting. It's not a mess. It's Dingle, but harder. So that way it's taking a challenge you've already gone through, defeating Dingle, and making it unique and more difficult, like what the floor is supposed to do with this theming and what it kind of tried to do but didn't fully deliver on. To give an example of how this might work, with Dingle, whenever Dingle doesn't attack, blank Delirium thing happens. Specifically, it happens when Dingle attacks in order to make the boss fight feel smoother and have impact and, make more sense, right? So, whenever there's the, dip spawn, whenever Dingle spawns the dips with, the whistle thing, right? Instead of it being dips, there's, those bigger, poop enemies. They're apparently called dingas, which I didn't know before doing some research for this video. But, those spawn instead. So, it's maybe not a ton harder in this case, but it's more to deal with. It's more enemies to work through, and whenever you defeat them, they turn into the dashing ones, and then there's dips. It's more to deal with. And then, speaking of dashing, when Dingle dashes, maybe it'll spawn a ring of Delirium shots, or whenever it shoots the triple shot, some Ipecac will come out, in a circle. That just makes the Dingle fight harder and more interesting. But along with that, for the sake of making the fight, more tense and also not something you can just breeze through, boss armor, yay! Along with some extra health and attacking faster and moving faster, right? Not to a crazy degree. It doesn't have to be a mess, but it can be difficult while being readable. And that's the idea behind this. Instead of just having a mess of stuff, you're actually defeating bosses that are difficult and makes sense. They're intelligible. They're difficult, but not incredibly annoying. And, like I said before, there's no funny business. There's not transforming. There's no teleporting and going everywhere. It's just a harder boss fight. And this sort of idea continues later on. Things get more complex. Things get more difficult. And as you defeat, let's say, the 4th boss room, the wall doesn't burst open, but you actually see a chest fall from the sky. Like how you would if you're about to beat the game. So you jump on in, and that is where the final boss fight starts. So you jump in the chest, you fall down into a chest room, which is fitting, right? And in the center, Delirium forms. Now, as you know well by now, Delirium normally constantly shifts back and forth between bosses you've already fought. Which actually, the bosses you've already fought part, I think is a cool idea. Because it's the actual, memories of what Isaac has gone through in the run. But hear me out. Just entirely scrapping the random changing part, let's dedicate the Delirium final boss fight to the story bosses that you fought in your run, rather than just any random ones, right? You're already going through delirious normal bosses. How about some delirious final bosses? Am I right? So, basically, let's explain it in an example. With the Polaroid, you go to Cathedral and the chest, and you defeat Mega Satan on your way. And then, whoa, 50% chance, you got the Void, and now you're fighting Delirium. In this case, Delirium has 3 phases rather than 3 forms. The first phase is Isaac from the cathedral, because you went through the cathedral. Then the second is Blue Baby, because chest. And the third is Mega Satan, because you fought Mega Satan to get there. This way, you're fighting actually important bosses, and the route you take still changes how your run goes. So, if you go through Darkroom, Satan, Lamb, Mega Satan, maybe. Right? Of course, this does mean certain routes will also have less forms, along with being different. If you go through Hush or Mother, you're going to have less forms, and it'll only be based on those bosses. Say, with Hush, the first form will be of a little sleeping baby Hush, and then the second will be big delirious Hush, Of course, they're both delirious, but big delirious Hush, right? From the second form of the Hush fight. In these cases, though, it's still like the same amount of health. It doesn't make the fight shorter, it just makes the forms longer and less of them. But these fights are also amped up. They're not just like, oh, it's blank boss fight with attacks kind of happening. Similarly to the other bosses, the attacks are unique now. But since it's the final boss fight, why not have just a bunch of unique stuff? It's all like new attacks, very similar attacks, but they have new like things to them which make them harder. And of course, there's a higher health total overall, and boss armor if it's not there before, maybe a bit more if it is there before, and faster attacking, all that good stuff. It's harder, there's some new like tricks in the fight, right? And everything is more difficult, and it has more purpose rather than just being this mess of bosses where you're just going through all of them. They're teleporting everywhere. Like before, there's not teleporting if it's not in the boss fight itself, which, given there is a lot of teleporting with final bosses, but that's irrelevant. And then, of course, after completing the fight, Delirium dissolves and the ending cutscene plays. So, there are my lengthy thoughts on how I think the Void could be reworked. I'm really glad I decided to make this, because I have liked thinking about this for a while, and it is very nice, and you might be able to tell, considering how long this video is and how I kept getting excited in the middle of it. This is gonna be a long video, but yeah, so yay. Anyway, I do want to say here as well that while I really like coming up with these ideas, I don't know how to code or mod in any capacity, right? If I did, I'd gladly make this and put it on the Steam Workshop after however long it would take to make it, but alas, 'twas not meant to be. If anyone, like, any of you watching this happen to know how to mod and code and stuff, and you want to make this into a mod, I think that'd be awesome. I am not opposed to that at all. Just, give me some credit for the concept. Oh, and I could actually make a video on it too. So if you leave a comment, I'll do stuff and talk about it, and that'd be so cool. But anyway, I'm not saying oh, please make it. Just if any of you want to, feel free to. But final thoughts, right? These are basically all of my thoughts on the Void. I think it's flawed, and with these changes, I think the direction of the floor is better. The challenge makes more sense. It's actually difficult, and it gets harder throughout, and it's unique. It provides unique challenges, and it's just, yeah. That's it. That's basically everything. really wish the Void was a bit more like this, or, you know, cool. Because Void's just not perfect how it is, you know, and I think there's a lot of potential in some of the ideas. Especially if that red swirly thing were used, you know, like the main icon of it on the stage progression. It wouldn't even have to have a gameplay function. It looks cool. Let it look cool in the game. But whatever. It's fine. At least we can all find solace in these little fantasies. Or mods. Lots of mods. Mods are cool too. Anyway, thank you for watching. I know we had kind of an outro-like thing here, but let's get into the actual outro, where we're just kind of talking about stuff in general, right? This video was a bit of an endeavor to do compared to the other ones, you know, a bit more. But either way, really, I appreciate you watching any of it. If you enjoyed, please consider liking and subscribing. Like I said before, you'd see more content like this, and it's a win-win because I like funny numbers, right? And seriously, thank you for watching. I really like making content like this, so, it's just fun to put stuff out like this. Anyway, as always, if you have any thoughts on what I said or any ideas of your own, I'd be happy to read them in the comments. I usually get, a notification whenever a comment's posted. If this video is old by the point you're watching it, I might not see it, but I look back pretty often to see if there's any stuff I can respond to, so just saying, you know, I'll respond when I can, if I see it at least. But anyway, that's all for this video. See you soon. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you, and bye!